Hope your first full week back at work has gone well. Almost over. We're here to carry you through on the latest Gauer Hour. Rob Joyce making Gauer with you. Ton of games to get to, both recapping and previewing. Very good games on Wednesday. Last night, probably the best overall night of the season so far. Megan, how's your week been back at work?
It's been.
It's
work. Yeah.
There you go. We'll hit on the busy nights from the last 48 hours. Last night, again, best night of the year so far. So many close games, some upsets, winning on the road very, very hard. Some teams did it, others not so much. We'll also be joined by a guest 15, 20 minutes from now. We'll talk about the defending champs, South Carolina. Lulu Kesin of the Greenville News will jump on to talk all things Gamecocks. Started up a brutal stretch of 5 games this Sunday where they will play 5 straight ranked opponents, starting with Texas. And they'll be shorthanded for that in every other game this year. We'll talk Ashlyn Watkins' injury. She tore her ACL in Sunday's win at Mississippi State. So honestly, might be some of the biggest news of the week, but we'll save that for when Lulu jumps on. Megan, where do you want to start? Any of 5 correct answers from last night alone. Good games on Wednesday as well. So where do you want to start?
Let's start with LSU-Tennessee. I feel like that's probably the best one from yesterday.
Most fun game, maybe the whole year to this point. Lived up to the hype. Even when LSU, they're up 18 in the first half, you just felt like it wasn't over. Turns out that wasn't the case. Tennessee storms out of the gates after halftime. They tied a bunch of times. They, I think, took the lead once. LSU, to their credit, every punch, they countered.
Yeah, I feel like for LSU here, I think when we talked about this game last week, we were worried about them coming out flat like they have in so many games this season and in that costing them, but they did the opposite here in terms of being able to kind of bring that lead out in the first quarter. But, I mean, a back and forth game in general, so I think as much as, yes, this is a loss for Tennessee, we're right there with the team that's considered to be kind of that near that top tier.
Yes, second straight loss for Tennessee. Very similar story as Sunday's loss to Oklahoma. A little more drastic of a comeback that came up short Sunday against the Sooners, but fall behind early. You're trying to play catch up the whole game. They have the offense to do it. Just ultimately come up. Was 1 point short on Sunday, 2 points short last night. What do you think of Kalen Gilbert, a bench option that LSU hasn't had a ton of bench options, even when they won the title 2 years ago? Comes off the bench, not just last night, but in general, she's been very, very good. And I thought it was interesting, maybe just feeding the hot hand. Game's on the line. It's a play. Everyone get out of the way and let her cook.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's been great off the bench for them in general. So a little surprised that it's her and not Morrow, but to have the ball in her hands at the end there. But at the same time, maybe a little unexpected is a good thing in that regard. And that Tennessee probably expected it's going to be Flage or Anissa Morrow that's going to take that shot. So you get them by surprise a little bit there. But I mean, she's just been fantastic for them off the bench. 22 points last night, but just to have a consistent score like that off the bench just adds such a dimension for a team that a lot of teams just don't have.
Yeah, I mean, most teams don't have a trio of Morrow, Flage, and Michaela Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Now you add a fourth option off the bench where there are certain teams with depth, but I don't know if there's someone quite as impactful outside of Danny Carnegie of Georgia Tech, who got hurt last night. But LSU's, to me, they're kind of like a faster Texas. They're not a big 3-point shooting team. They're built to play a team kind of like Tennessee, where they can get easy buckets, they can get points in the paint. I wonder how that looks against a team like Texas, a team like South Carolina, a team like Oklahoma, where they'll meet you, they'll match you physically. But for a team that we hadn't talked a whole lot about because there wasn't much worth talking about for the first 2 months, I don't even think that the third quarter, I don't think it was a collapse. I think Tennessee just started playing really well. I think they passed the flying colors to walk out of Knoxville with a win.
Yeah, especially on the road. I think in your first real kind of big game, it feels like of this year, I think they had a really good showing, and that's a big win.
Tennessee, so 2 losses in similar fashion. What do you make now that Tennessee deserved all the flowers they were getting coming into this week? Come back down to earth a little bit. They're 3 points away from still being undefeated. But what do you make of a team that they can score 20 points in a flash? They can give up 20 just as easily.
Yeah, I think, like you said, come back down to earth a little bit, but you're still very close with both LSU and Oklahoma. So I do think this team is still kind of well ahead of schedule in terms of you're right there competing with the top 10 caliber teams in January here. I think like the Oklahoma loss, like you can't force 30 turnovers and not win the game, but they just didn't shoot the ball well from 3, and that's going to be kind of what they hang their heads on this season. And like if they don't shoot the ball well, it's going to be hard for them to win. They shot out better against LSU here, but I think LSU had too many weapons for them to slow down fully.
Believe it or not, they're not even that good of a 3-point shooting team percentage wise. They're like 100th in the nation. They just take so many that
Right.
it almost doesn't matter if you take 30 a game. Like if you make 10 of them, that's still 10 made threes in a game. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's obviously the style they're going to play, whether they shoot it 3 of 30 or 20 of 30. Defensively, I think they're going to give up more points than most just because like there's so many possessions in a game.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to give up more than your half court team. The points per possession still needs to improve. And again, that's probably just an overreaction. Lots of teams give up a lot of points to LSU and Oklahoma. But they just, when they really needed it, can they get a stop? My other complaint from this game. Oh, go ahead, because my other complaint is very unrelated to defense.
I was just going to say on the defensive end too, like the press is great when it works, and it worked really well against Oklahoma when they turned the ball over 30 something times, but like it didn't really work great against LSU. But the downside of that press is that like you're leaving the lane open once the team breaks the press, and I feel like they're going to have to find a balance between pressing and not giving the team too easy buckets on the other end if they are able to break the press.
Yes, absolutely. Any other thoughts about the game? Because my complaint is not really about the game so much as the platform it was on.
No, go for it.
Okay, so this game was on SEC Network Plus. There are 8 between this past Wednesday and this upcoming Sunday, so a 5-day window. 8 ranked matchups in women's basketball. Do you know how many are on actual real TV?
8 ranked.
8 ranked on ranked. So like number 25 versus number whatever.
Okay, gotcha. 5. That's
3.
Maybe up to 3. That's
3. LSU-Tennessee and Texas-Alabama, were on SEC Network Plus. Ohio State-Michigan was on Big Ten Plus. Cal-NC State was on ACC Extra. I understand these are made weeks in advance. SEC, they're probably expecting to be part of the megacast last night. Whoops, SEC dropped the ball in football. It's every step is just so much harder in women's basketball. Like if you're seeking out the game, it's not that hard to find, but like you're trying to find people who are just flipping through and going, oh, LSU Tennessee. Oh, it's like 70-68 with 6 minutes left. Let's tune in. Like no one's seeking that out on the ESPN app.
Yeah.
That's
it's just unfortunate. Especially a game of this profile, really like a top 15 matchup to not be on TV is crazy.
I mean, do you know what was on SEC Network at 7 o'clock last night? And 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock?
Probably like their like pre-recorded programming or like a replay of a football game.
Correct. SEC Now from 7 to 8, and then the re-air from 8 to 9, and the re-air from 9 to 10. You could have just slid the game back 30 minutes because it was a 6:30 tip and aired it at 7. Do you know what was on ACC Network at 10 o'clock last night instead of Cal-NC State?
I was going to guess some kind of coverage of the football game at least but that's
no, because Notre Dame's an independent in football.
Oh, right. I forget that. So yeah.
ACC Legends. I don't know who the legend is. And then a re-air of the relationship between Coach K and Roy Williams, which I'll bet you has aired 10,000 times. So it's just, that's my complaint is every single step of the way. After all the progress the sport has made in the last 2 years, 1 year, like pulling teeth. And we have more games like that next week. Anyways, other games from Thursday. We can stay in the SEC. Top 10 team goes down. Mississippi State, Oklahoma. Much needed win for the Bulldogs, who have a good record, but that record was a little inflated by competition, I think, before yesterday.
Yeah, I think this is a really solid win for them. It's going to age well come March or come bracket time. I don't know. I feel like this was like kind of coming from Oklahoma too. Like they beat Tennessee, but you turned over the ball 31 times. Like I just think it's really hard to be a top 10 team when you're turning over the ball at the rate that Oklahoma is at the moment.
Yes. they've played 16 games and have turned it over 20 or more times, so basically half the time. They turn it over at least 20 times, let alone 30.
30.
Like, you do all this work. The game looked over with like 30 seconds left. They do all this work to get the ball down 2, and it looked like the game was over. And then it's fitting that the game ends because they turned it over. It just,
Yep.
and it also
20-something turnovers again. Yep.
Yes, like that's not a way to win. Like, no one values the basketball in this sport. I said it last week. Like 10 teams seem to value the basketball. Everyone else just turns it over willy-nilly. And on top of that, last night also strengthened my fear of when Oklahoma needs a stop, they can't get it.
Yeah.
They had 6 times in the final 6 minutes where one stop would have given them the ball, and they could have either taken the lead or tied the game. Of those 6 times, they gave up a bucket 5 of them. They did get a stop and then didn't score on the other end. So it's like you can't get a stop and you don't protect the basketball. Doesn't matter how good you are offensively, you're going to get got.
Yep.
Mississippi State, though, Jerkayla Jordan, she's been in her bag since the end of November. She had 24 last night. She had 24. They hung around with South Carolina for a half. When you have a bucket getter, like, that's such a good equalizer. Like, Mississippi State probably doesn't have the second, third, fourth best player on the floor when you're playing South Carolina, when you're playing Oklahoma. But if you have the best player at the end of the game, you're onto something. And I think they're going to be a lot more comfortable with this win on Selection Sunday.
Yeah, I agree. I think this puts them in a much better spot in terms of that's the type of win that even if you're sitting in the bubble, like, that's enough to usually push you to the right side of it, barring that, like, the rails don't fall off in the next 2 months here.
Right. I mean, we're at a point still where top 10 upsets against unranked teams aren't overly common. So yeah, even if they're on the bubble with a group of 6, 7 other teams, how many of those 6 or 7 are going to have a top 10 win? Probably none of them. Right.
Exactly.
The other SEC game, we won't have to spend a lot of time of it because I didn't watch it because LSU-Tennessee went to a media timeout in the 4th quarter. So I flip over Texas-Alabama and it's 9-0. And Texas did a 4 turnovers. And then I looked again, it was 14-0. And then I looked again, it was 21-5. And then they went on an 11-0 run after that. So I did not watch Texas-Alabama, but
for Alabama, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously great win for Texas, but we've talked a lot about Alabama and, like, they get, like, the good wins, but, like, when it comes to this, like, the next tier, it's still like they just can't compete at the next level. And we talked about, like, you don't need to win these games, but, like, can you hang around and whatever 40, 50 points they lost by last night is not hanging around.
Yes, lost by 44 to Texas. I actually did this because they play South Carolina next week. So I did this before they lost by 44. Last year, they played Texas as a top 10 team in the second round. They lost by 11. If you remember that game, it was like they weren't ever really threatening to win.
Right.
Lost by 28 at South Carolina. Lost by 20 to LSU. Lost by 13 to South Carolina 2 years ago. So last night was the only real blowout. But the next step is not even win. Can you make this a competitive game with 5 minutes left? Can you make the outcome in doubt? Because even in some of these quote unquote like smaller losses by 11 and by 13, I know what's happening in the last 5, 6, 7 minutes of the game. It's just a matter of what's the margin going to be. So that's the next step. Because I mean, yes, beating Texas and beating South Carolina is hard.
Right.
Losing by 44, that means you're still a ways away.
Yeah.
Tournament team, like I'm not,
Right. I'm not saying anything that they're not going to make the tournament, but yeah, you gotta compete a little bit more than that.
Yes. ACC last night. If you watched Tennessee LSU and then tuned over to North Carolina Duke, it's 2 different sports.
Yeah.
It was offensive, not offensive to watch that game. Also, I thought it was beautiful. It was like it got so bad that it's like this is watching art. It was amazing.
I mean, and it's almost exactly what you would expect from these 2 teams playing each other, especially like maybe not the Duke of this year because they have been scoring more, but the Duke of past years. But I mean, for a game that went into overtime to end at 53-46, just whew.
We'll talk about the other overtime game in the ACC, but at the same time, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Duke, North Carolina not yet started overtime. It was 80-80, and 40-40. It's magnificent. Did you watch Seinfeld? I can't.
No,
You look like
I've
someone
not.
who didn't watch Seinfeld.
Yeah, no,
Well,
I've never seen it.
Never seen it? Ugh, well, I'm going to talk anyways because it's American Classic, Megan. It's probably available on Hulu or something. Anyways, famous scene. They paint a portrait of Kramer. I know you don't know who Kramer is. It doesn't matter. And there's two folks there. They want to buy the painting of this stranger, and they start talking about it, and they're going back and forth, back and forth. And I thought about this watching the game. They say, it's a loathsome, offensive brute, but I can't look away. It transcends time and space. It sickens me. I love it. That's how I felt watching Duke, North Carolina. There was a point in the fourth quarter, a sequence, Jaden Donovan for Duke. She nearly airballed her first free throw. I think it grazed the front of the rim. The second one, she then bricked off the backboard. Duke got the offensive rebound. They lost it. There's like 6 bodies on the ground. No one gets it. It rolls out of bounds. It's like, that's just in 30 seconds. If you watch no other 30 seconds of that game, that's what that game was. And it was awesome. Who's the real Duke, though? Is it the one that put up 70 points for the first month and a half? Or is it the one that struggled against South Florida and then did that last night?
I don't know. I feel like recent history is telling us that last night is maybe more the norm, but I mean, obviously that team that was scoring 70 points against some decent teams is in there somewhere, though maybe it's just, Oklahoma can't stop anyone, and that's why they were able to put up 70. I don't know.
North Carolina's a good defense. That doesn't
Yeah.
excuse 16 points in 2.5 quarters, but still,
No.
that's a good defense. In North Carolina just keeps showing me that they're North Carolina.
Yeah. Looking at the box score right now, both these teams had more turnovers last night than they had made field goals. And that pretty much sums it up.
What if I told you, though, that 16-16 at halftime, that was not the lowest scoring half of the night in college basketball? Would you believe me?
Yes, because I know it's true, but no.
So you know what game I'm talking about. Texas A&M Corpus Christi, who beat Texas A&M to start the year. Texas A&M Corpus Christi and Northwestern State. Do you remember what the halftime score was of that game?
I do not, but
9-8.
It looks like one of those things that you go on ESPN and you're like, there must be an error. Like, this must be midway through the first quarter.
Yeah, the Lady Demons, that's Northwestern State, led 7-2 after the first quarter, and the Islanders rebounded with a big 6-2 second quarter. Northwestern State went on to win 46-42. They actually scored in the second half. But, yeah, it's glorious. Gloriously bad basketball. Can be wildly entertaining. North Carolina, by the way, it's a burden being right, because what did we say going into the Notre Dame game? They'll probably hold Notre Dame below 90 points, but is 75, 76 points enough? Well, dang it, Notre Dame scored 76 points, and it was not enough. So come here for all of your information, folks, because North Carolina is they have their identity, and they're very predictable to know how they're probably going to play. But nice win over Duke, 4th in a row at home against the Blue Devils. Takes us to another ACC game last night. Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech. First loss of the year for the Yellow Jackets. First marquee win of the Megan Duffy era. Nice win on the road.
Yeah, great win for Virginia Tech. Move them into that bubble conversation, which is, I think, where they would be a good goal to be right now for this team. Obviously, a big transition this year, so being in the conversation is a good spot to be. Big win for Virginia Tech.
11-4, no bad losses. Iowa, Michigan, Duke, Florida State, their first good win. They're going to have chances, but work to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think they're going to have to. And you don't need to beat Notre Dame, but you've got to knock off in Louisville or some of these other good teams in the ACC.
Right. Take the muddled 3 through whatever in the ACC and split against them all, and you're probably in a decent spot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Unless just don't lose to a Wake Forest or a Pitt or SMU. Carly Wenzel, spectacular. The team hit 12 threes. They only played 5 players in a 50-minute game, so I'm sure depth is a problem now. Virginia Tech also lost. Like, Wenzel is a holdover. Michaela Eck is a holdover. I think everyone else is new pretty much. So they'll get more players as Duffy recruits. But that's just an issue this year. Yellow Jacket side lost Annie Carnegie in the third quarter with an injury. Tony Morgan, Cara Dunn were really good. They just, they're a 3-headed monster, and you chop off one of their heads, and a little more beatable as a 2-headed monster.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of need those 3 key players because that's what they get almost everything from. So hopefully Carnegie's okay. But we'll see what happens there.
That was a badass buzzer beater to force double overtime, though, by Augusta Naite. Off the hands. I'm sitting there on home watching on TV. Like, oh, that's good. It's pure. It was beautiful shot. Ultimately, Georgia Tech, I don't take a whole lot away from it. Losing at home to a lower middle class ACC team. Like, it's not terrible. It's just they were flying. I don't want to say flying too close to the sun because they had a lot of convincing wins over pretty good teams. I just don't think that they're, I think they're closer to playing Virginia Tech as they are. I mean, I guess we'll find out Thursday when they play Notre Dame.
Yeah, agreed. I still think that's going to be a good game, but
I guess we'll see if Carnegie, she walked off very gingerly and had a towel over her head. So hopefully she gets better over the next week. If not, Georgia Tech's already fighting an uphill battle.
Right. So, then they need her to be healthy for that one.
Yes. Hopefully. And then the other ACC game of note last night, both East Coast teams that flew west lost. Florida State lost at Stanford. And then Cal-NC State was a good game. Cal comes out on top by 7. Yeah, 7 points. But otherwise a good game. And actually, I think NC State may have found something in the post.
Yeah.
What's the Swedish kid? Tilda. Let me look it up. I'm blanking on her name. Tilda Trigger. 19 points, 10 rebounds. Westmore played 5 other players. None of them played more than 4 minutes. Basically, the starters played the entire time. Came up a little bit short against a good Cal team that made 11 threes, out-rebounded them by 7. So the size issue is still a little bit of a concern down low. Cal's decent down low. But I think NC State is on the precipice of turning a corner. They don't need a double-double from a 6'6" freshman every single game. But if they can get some sort of production, then, Sinai Rivers isn't going to shoot 5 of 15 every game.
Right.
Madison Hayes isn't going to shoot 1 of 7 every game. So I don't think they're too far off. And a 7-point loss on the road to a top 25 team is nothing to panic about.
Yeah, agreed. I do think if they, like you said, they don't need a double-double every night, but if they can get some consistency in the post, they'll be in a much better spot.
Yes, and winning is hard on the road. Traveling 3,000 miles is hard. Stanford picked up a nice win over Florida State. Again, it goes both ways. We talk so much about USC and UCLA and, these West Coast schools traveling east. They got to travel west too, these coast teams. Only other notable result that I saw last night, nice win for Illinois, who I thought was cooked because Makaira Cook and Gretchen Dolan were both announced out for the year. What does their resume look like now?
Yeah, I have them. Let's see, I literally just updated it 5 minutes before this re-recorded. I have them in the last 4 in. I feel like they have good wins, and then their losses aren't bad. That just have, I will say that 23 points lost to Kentucky is not great because of the margin. But otherwise, your losses are Kentucky, Ohio State, Washington, Minnesota. I wouldn't call any of those bad losses. You've got a nice win now over Iowa, a nice win over Oregon, and I feel like there's one more. Oh, a nice win over Florida State. So they're not in a bad spot. I think they're pretty bubbly right now, but if you pick up a couple more good wins to kind of balance out some of those losses in conference play, they're probably in the field.
Yeah, my concern isn't so much the resume, just as much as they lost their second best player and a quality double-digit scorer. I think both have been out for a couple of weeks, but it's official. They're both out for the season.
Right.
So it's what does it look like going forward? They play Indiana in their next game. They have a week off. They play Michigan State, starting to show some cracks in the armor of the Spartans. And then they close at UCLA, at USC, and home to Michigan. So they can do some damage in the next month against an okay schedule, like a gettable schedule. I think they'll be fine. It's just how do they handle it? They have Kendall Bostic. That helps. She's really, really good.
Yeah, and I think those injuries, like you said, if they can't get the wins on the stretch, that's probably going to discount some of those earlier wins that were with them. But if they can prove in these next handful of games where they've got some decent competition, then they're able to get a couple of wins. I don't know. I don't think that'll affect them too much.
And I'll admit, may have been wrong on Iowa. It's fine. They're a fine team. Yeah. I thought they could have the potential to be top 20, top 15 good. I was probably wrong. That's okay. They're fine.
Yeah.
They're no different than 7 other Big Ten teams.
Right, exactly. All part of that middle group.
Yeah. Swing and a miss. No big deal. Anything else from Thursday? We're going to have Lulu Kesin jumping on here in a few minutes, so I'll save the USC-Maryland talk so we can go a decent amount in there. How about we'll stay in the Big Ten? Ohio State beating Michigan on Wednesday. First real adversity the Buckeyes have faced this year on the road. They're down early. Michigan's hitting everything known to man. And I thought the guards in particular, they passed with flying colors.
Yeah, agreed. It kind of looked like Michigan might run away with it for a little bit in the beginning there, but Ohio State was able to fight back. I was really impressed with Jelena Cambridge. Haven't watched a ton of Buckeyes this year just because they haven't really played anyone, but I was really impressed with her. I thought it was a good showing from Ohio State. Kind of one of the first tests we've seen them play, so this is a good win.
Yeah, Cambridge had 22 points after halftime. Chance Gray, the Oregon transfer, really, really good, had 4 threes in the second half. They out-rebounded Michigan in the second half after they got murdered on the glass in the first half. They showed me a lot. I'm still worried about their rebounding. Like, this is a similarly built Ohio State team as the one from the last couple of years. They maybe don't force quite as many turnovers, but kind of like you mentioned with Tennessee, if you can break that pressure, it leaves you prone to giving up easy buckets, and they're not the biggest team in the world, or they're not they don't bang bodies down low like some of the other top 15 teams that we see. And I'm also worried the starters didn't come out in the second half. 0 substitutions, which is fine. That's just, and especially when they're playing that well, like, why would you make a change? I'm curious what it looks like if they're trailing and say Cambridge, Gray, and McMahon, like all 3 of them don't have it, or 2 of the 3 don't have it. Do you have anything off the bench that can change the game? That's all. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Same story for Michigan. Copy paste last week, copy paste 3 weeks ago, copy paste a month ago. Close.
They're
not
close,
quite there.
Not there yet. Yep. Yeah. They'll get there.
Fine.
We'll get there next year.
They will be an 8 or a 9 seed, I think. And if they win their first game, I don't think any 1 seed is going to sit there and go, oh boy, we're playing Michigan. I think they're going to sit there and go, crap, we're playing Michigan. Yeah. One of those 1 seeds could be the defending national champs. Our guests enter the chat. We'll talk South Carolina. We return next. We head down to Columbia to talk a little South Carolina with the Gamecocks beat reporter for the Greenville News, Lulu Kesin. Follow her on Twitter at Lulu Kesin, Kesin. Lulu, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Of course. Thanks for coming on. South Carolina, don't need to talk about last night's win over Texas A&M. Looked like a lot of games against lower level competition. Biggest story of the week, though, obviously Ashlyn Watkins' injury. South Carolina built better than just about anyone to overcome a major injury, but how do they go about replacing Watkins, especially defensively, given, she just does things you can't teach some of what makes her so good with the athleticism and the ability defensively?
Defensively, obviously, rebounding is an easy answer. Ashlyn Watkins is kind of a rebounding machine, especially in some of these SEC matchups, or at least she was last year. I think the biggest thing, and Dawn Staley has been kind of harping on it this week, is she's not really asking anyone to do anything differently. She's just asking people to play their game. And I think that she wasn't getting a lot of consistent offense and, honestly, defense from players like Chloe Kitts and Sanaya Fagan, and just putting those pieces together and putting one good game after one good game. She's not asking them to be, 20-point scoring superstars every night, but there was kind of this up and down with some of the forwards that played either in front of or behind Ashlyn. So I think not having her in the rotation, everyone just needs to realize they need to be a little bit more consistent and be obviously more aggressive crashing the boards, because they're not going to have Ashlyn to depend on. And with her rebounding, she opens up so much of the transition offense. Like, she's so instrumental. So I think just recognizing what that loss means on the court and figuring out, okay, who best can kind of recognize her presence in certain ways and try to mirror that going forward.
How much of an opportunity is this for Joyce Edwards? Obviously, she's been good so far, but hasn't been asked to do too much for this team. But she did have a nice game last night, kind of in that first one without Watkins.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because, like Dawn said, I think she feels the presence of like Ashlyn being gone, or I think she feels her absence. And, we didn't ask her to do anything more, but she's giving us more. And then Joyce was like, no, I mean, like, no one really needs to step up. We just kind of all have to do our thing. Like, it's so clear that she's just trying to stay incredibly present and not kind of buy into the storyline of Ashlyn being gone and opening it up. That's kind of why I didn't even go into panic mode with the Watkins injury. Obviously, it's a loss, but Joyce Edwards, like you said, has played so well. And honestly, it just sort of seems like she's just going to get more minutes. Sanaya Fagan got in a little bit of foul trouble early. And don't get me wrong, there's going to be games where Joyce doesn't, perform as well as she has been. But at the same time, I think she's the one that's going to be affected most by Watkins being out, and not because she's going to be necessarily doing anything new, but she's just going to be playing a lot more, in my opinion. And especially in these games, like, it's hard to kind of gauge minutes when they're playing like Charleston Southern,
Right.
Whereas now in SEC play, like if Joyce isn't playing well, Dawn isn't going to take her out just to give minutes to somebody else.
Right, you're going to find out real fast with 5 straight ranked opponents what the real rotation looks like. Bigger picture. For like the entire Freshies era, they basically just had a bunch of pros. Like, you never had to worry. Like Aaliyah Boston, Zaya Cook, Bree Beal, Victoria Saxton. Everyone's on time. Everyone knows what to do. Last year, Dawn told me it was like a roller coaster, like a new twist and turn with the team every day. Of course, she says that, and then they go on and undefeated national champion. What's her sense of the team this year?
I think it's a little bit of both. She says that they haven't fully been able to like graduate from daycare yet, but the players themselves, I think, recognize an obvious difference in the way that they're practicing and performing. I think preseason this year was a lot stronger than it was last year. I think the focus was there from day one that maybe was lacking last year. And I think that it's funny because, like you said, like it worked out well. Dawn has kind of said, like, I'm a very traditional coach, but with them, I've had to kind of learn that if it's like working, just go with it. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Like, Dawn is seeing a giggly Tessa Johnson on the bench, but that giggly Tessa Johnson is hitting 5 threes in the second quarter. Like, there are just aspects of who this team is personality-wise that kind of you would expect that to lead to sloppy play or kind of miscues or all these negative things. But when it's going well, it's sort of, I think Dawn's figuring out still her line of, okay, when do I quote unquote discipline this behavior or take note of it? And then when do I recognize it's just a fundamental part of these players who are winning basketball games? So I think they're a little bit more controlled than last year, but certainly didn't do like a whole 360 transformation of who they are. And that fun daycare energy definitely is still there.
We talked about the front court of this team, but there's obviously a ton of talent in the backcourt as well. Is this kind of Te-Hina Paopau's team at the end of the day this year?
Yes and no. I think Te-Hina Paopau recognizes that Raven Johnson's struggling on offense, and I think she's like in an experienced, kind of mature way, taking it upon herself to control the tempo and the pace just a little bit more, knowing that, Raven might be kind of struggling mentally when she's like 2 for 8 from the floor, things like that. I think Maddie McDaniel is going to be the most impactful player potentially even next year. Like, she's in concussion protocol right now still. I think she's expected back soon. But, like, South Carolina values the basketball, or I guess she just doesn't turn the ball over. Like, her assist to turnover ratio speaks for itself. But her ability to control the floor, but also push the tempo, push the pace. Like, she just has incredible game management and kind of ball control. And I think she's going to potentially take over for what Pau is doing this year and what Te-Hina Paopau is able to kind of to calm everyone, especially in these slow starts when maybe myself included, people might kind of be like, why aren't they going? Like, why aren't they going? They're down 5. It's like, I think Pau has incredible game recognition and clock management. And I think that's why this year in particular, she's coming into her own, because she's not just a 3-point shooter, but it's her second year in the SEC now. She's taking the ball to the hole, and she's kind of controlling everything from like a mental standpoint.
That's great stuff. And, Maddie McDaniel, like South Carolina's best at like waiting your turn. Like Tessa Johnson, you mentioned her. I'll ask about her. Basically a bit part for her freshman year. March rolls around, a bunch of double figure games. She comes in the national title game, drops 19. Now it seems like if you asked to name the most important players on South Carolina, like I don't think you have to go far to name Tessa Johnson. Like how important has she been?
Yeah, what Tessa does so well, and I feel like I'm running out of ways to describe what I'm trying to say about Tessa, but she just plays like textbook basketball. And I think that's incredibly important on this team. Like her and Fulwiley balance each other out so well because obviously you have Mylasia Fulwiley who can fake out any defender and kind of be that spark plug. But when Dawn needs a basket, Tessa Johnson can score. Like she reads defense in the blink of an eye. She can tell if a man is sagging off too much. She'll hit a three basically with little to no space. Then she'll recognize when a defender is kind of playing her too strong, coming out too fast. She'll go by him, textbook elbow jumper, baseline drive. Like she is so important because she can read a defense. She never comes across as though she's coming off the bench and is thinking about her next move. She kind of just plays. And from such a talented, when you have such a talented starting five, you need a player on the bench who's going to be so dependable, but isn't worrying about, doing too much or doing the right thing. She just plays basketball because in the SEC, a team's going to show up in a different way every night. Like no game is ever really going to be the same. You're never really going to know to a degree. And I think Tessa's most kind of valuable skill right now is that she's able to work with whatever defense. And I think that's going to be really helpful when Dawn is now down one in the rotation, even if Tessa isn't necessarily a forward like Ashlyn was.
You mentioned Fulwiley as well, and obviously just such an electrifying player. You had a great story on her a couple weeks ago on how, her growth with the help of Dawn and Steph Curry. How have you seen her grow since last year, or really just even that UCLA game where she was benched at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, I think that Fulwiley recognizing that she wants to be more than a flashy player is a lot of growth. I think a lot of people are looking at her numbers this year and kind of being like, ooh, like, is she maybe in a sophomore slump? And like, in a way that's sort of valid. Yes, she's having these weird kind of cold scoring streaks. And there's been games where I'm sitting there and I'm like, she is trying to do way too much. She knows she's trying to do way too much. Dawn knows it. I think her growth, though, is how she's handling it. Like, I wasn't there, and I want to say it was before I got this job, but I want to say it was the Duke or North Carolina game last year. Dawn basically benched her the same way that she benched her against UCLA. And I think Fulwiley had a much different reaction, kind of a lot more confusion. Whereas like UCLA, I think she knew exactly why. I mean, Dawn, and she did say she knew exactly why. She had 3 really bad turnovers in 2 minutes against a team when you're kind of trying to score the basketball, value the possession. That said, even kind of through that, she's continuously seeming, to pick herself up and try to be both a player that can provide kind of the flash like she did yesterday. I mean, some of the moves she was doing were obviously highlight worthy and have been, but again, they're up 40 on Texas A&M. Like that's when it's the time to do that. Whereas I think now she's recognizing, okay, Sunday against Texas, like on a fast break, I can't try something like that because that could be the 2 points that win us the game. So I think she's kind of still continuing to learn that, but that's sort of where I've seen, in front of my eyes, in my opinion, her grow the most for sure. Is that game recognition and figuring out, okay, when is what I do differently best? Because it's not like she's only a good player because of the crazy behind the back. It's her spot up shooting. It's her layups. She makes great layups through contact when she doesn't change her shot. So I think she's growing. There's definitely still work to do. I mean, heck, she's young, but we'll see how the rest of the year in SEC play pans out for her. I'm curious.
Yeah, obviously expectations for her, for the whole team, sky high. You win a national title undefeated and you bring back everyone but Camilla. They take that early season loss brutally Was there a silver lining in that? Because it feels like leading up to that, like you kind of see it coming. Slow start against Michigan, slow start against Clemson. Since then, though, it seems like there's been a hard reset since that loss, and they've largely looked like South Carolina. So was that like a real reflection point, that UCLA loss?
Absolutely. And like I say this not to be like, oh, like I knew it, I'm so smart, but like I just had a feel like in the beginning of my preseason predictions, I was like, they're going to lose to UCLA. And then as the season kind of started, based on how they played against Michigan and NC State a little bit, I'm completely blanking on who they play third. Maybe Charleston.
They played Clemson.
Clemson, right.
Yeah.
Like there are these slow starts. And I was like, they need to lose on Sunday or else these are just going to be a lingering habit that's never fixed. And it's going to bite them at a way more important time, in my opinion. Like, get it out of the way. And granted, like, Dawn Staley never wants to lose, but she saw the value in it. Like, I think the UCLA loss, it was a quad one loss to a very talented team, potentially one that they might face again in the tournament, depending on the bracket, obviously. But I'm very curious to see a South Carolina, like, we're not going to see it, but like, I would be curious to see a South Carolina team that didn't lose that game and how they kind of are handling games like even the Mississippi State and Missouri kind of like sloppy SEC starts. But definitely a silver lining, definitely a learning point. And I think South Carolina has just kind of been a whole different team, honestly, since the UCLA game than they were the first 5 games.
I will say, Megan, I'll let you jump in a second. That's what I said like 3 weeks ago, right, Megan? Yeah, if they had lost by even like 2 or 3 points, you can think like, oh, you know, neutral court or a bounce here, a bounce there, like we're fine. But you lose by 20. Oh, am I preparing properly? Are the coaches preparing properly? Am I doing everything I need to do? I think it was almost more effective that they lost in that fashion than, 2-3 point loss. Megan, go ahead.
Yeah. 5 straight ranked opponents starting with Texas on Sunday. What do you get the sense it'll be like internally or even externally at the fans if there's a couple losses in there, given the expectations this program has kind of created for itself over the last few years?
That's a good question because, with basketball, there's so many games. So it's like you're so focused on one, but then you realize that one game can kind of be, such a statement. I'm trying to figure out Oklahoma. Oklahoma lost to Mississippi State last night, who South Carolina had trouble with at one point, but then kind of went on a 19-2 run and kind of blew out after that. So it's like, I think the fans and I think South Carolina will be very, I don't want to say understanding, but I think that things will be different if they drop a game to Texas than they drop a Tennessee or LSU, just given the history. And I don't think South Carolina losing 1 or even 2 of the next 5 or even 6 games is any point to worry, but I do think it's a note to say South Carolina fans expect perfection and they're okay. Like it seemed like they stomached the UCLA loss, hopefully for the same reasons. Like we're all saying, like they just understood it. It kind of had some benefit, but I'm curious to see kind of if Vic Schaefer comes back to Colonial Life Arena on Sunday and just absolutely quiets the crowd, like how that will be going forward. I definitely think South Carolina's fans, irrelevant to the question, but like I covered football, and I definitely think South Carolina football fans are much more like they'll sway a lot more than basketball fans. Like basketball fans are loyal. They seem to they stay more with Dawn in the program, where I don't know how much, a 2-game to top 5 opponents a loss would be, but I am curious to see kind of how it plays out.
Right. I think, even if they lose a couple here in the next few weeks, they're still top 2-3 teams to win a national title. I think we all know what happens for South Carolina to win a national title. We've seen it enough. We'll leave you with this. What keeps South Carolina from repeating?
Specifically, I think Notre Dame.
Okay.
Only because, what against Mississippi State, it's so hard because South Carolina can have these very visible bad mistakes and then win by 50. So it's like, but Mississippi State, it truly looked like nobody wanted to guard a guard. Like every single player on the court was like, oh, you want to go by me? Okay. And so it's like how I haven't seen yet this season South Carolina, face guard successfully a Hannah Hidalgo and Olivia Miles. So I think what could keep South Carolina out of or from winning another national championship, like they're kind of in their own way because a lot of their issues could be internal. Like South Carolina has the ability to defend. It's just the matter of, oh, right, we have to defend for 40 minutes in this game. And so that's why I think this next stretch of games will be very telling because it's tricky. Like with UCLA, they couldn't defend Kiki Rice and also Lauren Betts. That's kind of what allowed UCLA to go on a tear, was just that they were able to give up. If they were face guarding a guard, Betts got the insert layup. If they're guarding her, kick out 3. Then TCU, it's like they keep Sedona Prince from scoring basically and kind of shut down Haley. Like they've had one game where they've done really well against talented guards. They've done another game where they haven't. I'm curious to see what path they take, and I think that will decide a lot in terms of national championship because you meet a lot of really talented non-conference players in the tournament most of the time that could be unstoppable.
Well, that was great stuff. Lulu Kesin of the Greenville News. Follow her on Twitter at Lulu Kesin. Thanks for joining us, Lulu.
Thanks so much for having me. This was awesome.
Our thanks to Lulu. That was really, really good stuff talking Gamecocks. What do you think, Megan, will be the impact of Watkins' injury the rest of the way?
I do think we've talked about how this South Carolina team is been more dependent on the guards in general. Like that is kind of where their strength has been this season. So I think that's going to be more true now versus than ever. Losing Watkins in the front court is a big loss, but I think with the talent they have in the backcourt, like they have enough pieces. We talked about Joyce Edwards, Chloe Kitts, like to pick up that loss in the front court. They're probably a little less of a head and shoulders ahead of everyone without her, but like they're still going to be a national title contender.
Yeah, they already weren't like the warpath tank defensively
Right.
that just erases everything in the paint. And even with Watkins, now without her, they're more vulnerable than they were. They're still really, really good. I think Joyce Edwards is going to be really good. Different player than Watkins. Probably not as impactful defensively. I think they're fine.
Right.
Like, obviously, you don't want to lose your best interior defender, even if she comes off the bench, but still, I'm not hitting the panic button on South Carolina. You and I both have places to be, so we'll kind of run through the rest of this fairly quickly. Want to get your thoughts. USC and Maryland on Wednesday kind of got lost with so much madness last night. I thought it was a very impressive win for USC on the road.
Yeah, a really impressive win for USC, and I admittedly have been like unsure if Maryland is truly the real deal, but I think they showed that they're the real deal in that game, even though they did lose. Like hung right around with USC, which is a USC team that probably now has 2 of the best wins in the country: a road win over UConn and a road win over this Maryland team. That's pretty impressive. So I thought this was a really good showing from USC, but also a good benchmark for Maryland that they really are at the level that they're ranked at.
Yeah, I thought when Maryland went up 9 early, I harped last week, it's just a long trip. Rutgers on a Sunday into Maryland on a Wednesday. They probably got there like Friday or Saturday. That's just a long trip. Awful situation back home. You wonder if they're heads are rightfully there. Instead, they turn it around. It's a very close game. Juju kind of had a classic Juju game and not necessarily the best kind of classic Juju game. 21 points, 19 shots, 1 3, 8 turnovers. Iria Fenn. I know we haven't talked about her a ton. She's almost been quietly consistent. Just every game, 17, 18, 19 points, a double-double. It's not flashy. And she's just not as flashy as she was last year at Stanford, probably just because she's teammates with Juju. But she's just sort of such a reliable number 2.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought for me, what impressed me the most about USC in this game was that Juju did have that kind of game where she had the turnovers and she wasn't super efficient from the floor, but they still found a way to win it. Because I think we've talked a lot about USC's success in the last month or so, since they've kind of turned that corner from the Notre Dame loss, and Juju's been so good, but this was like the rest of the team being good, even when Juju had a bit of an off night. And I thought they got a lot from Kaylee Heckel and Avery Powell off the bench as well, 10 points from each of those. That was huge. So I thought this was a good step for USC in terms of like they're finding a way to win without Juju Watkins being spectacular any given night.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the freshmen. Let's not forget they had the top-ranked recruiting class in the nation coming in. Kennedy Smith, Howell Heckle, all came in, all were impactful. I think their growth is as important as any as to why they've looked so good since the Notre Dame loss. And I'm with you on Maryland. I don't take a whole lot away. Like 4 of their 6 players that they really play had off nights, and they almost beat USC. I'm not like, if anything, yeah, you're right. It's proof that they are for real. They looked the part between Sunday's impressive win at Iowa and a coin flip game last night. Yeah, I know it's a loss. I was impressed. Leads us to the preview. Not a ton compared to what we just had the last week. Tomorrow, the best game is Oklahoma State, West Virginia. Oh, we can talk K-State, Utah quickly. I was impressed by K-State. I think we were harsh on the Big 12 last week.
Yeah.
TCU is good. I think now Kansas State winning the way it did at Utah, I think Kansas State is good.
Yeah.
Are you still somewhat
Still
of a
something
non-believer?
about Kansas State just holds me back, and I can't put my finger on what it is. And it's like the same team that it was last year, and I don't know. Something about it holds me back. And at some point, I'll figure out why. But I just like, to me, they like just feel like they're a step down from that top group, even though like they have the resume to be a part of that top group, and I don't know what it is.
They're very good defensively, and that carries you a long way. I mean, they're
Yeah.
top 10 in offense and defensive rating on our hoop stats. They lead the country in field goal percentage. They lead the country in field goal percentage defense. They're top 20 in making threes. They're top 5 in three-point percentage defense. They're second in points per play on offense. They're 4th in points per play on defense. This is a well-rounded team, and they have an All-American player in Ayoka Lee. And you're still sitting there like,
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
I don't
There's
care.
something that holds me back. And I think it's probably just like you rattle off all those numbers, but like
I understand the
outside of this
competition hasn't
Duke
been
and Utah game, like who have they done it against?
fair. I think Big 12, there's TCU and K-State. I know West Virginia is ranked 17th. I think there's a gulf between 2 and everyone else.
I'll agree.
Throw West Virginia, Oklahoma State. Those 2 play tomorrow in Stillwater. Baylor, Utah, Colorado. Throw them all in a bag. Mix it up. Pull one out. Hey, that's who wins today. And that's who wins on the next night. And that's fine. They're all more than bubbly.
Yeah, they'll make the
Like
field.
7, 8,
Yeah.
like 6 through 10 seeds. Mostly the Big 12. The big game of the week. So we'll have to kind of rip through some of these. South Carolina, Texas. I think of all the games South Carolina can miss Ashlyn Watkins, this one, aside from obviously the number next to Texas's name, just the profile of the Longhorns makes them miss her more than most of these other games.
Yeah, I agree. I think Texas is a team that's going to match up with you in size. They're going to put pressure on the front court in a way most other teams are not. So this is the type of matchup where, yeah, you're going to miss having Watkins on the floor, especially when you've just lost her. So you haven't had 3 or 4 games to kind of iron out what does it look like without her.
Yeah, go back to the UCLA games, similar size for the Bruins as the Longhorns, right? South Carolina was out-rebounded by 7, and they were -8 in points in the paint. And that doesn't happen to South Carolina, like ever. They never get out-rebounded. They never lose points in the paint. They shot 8 of 12 from 3 against the Bruins. That didn't matter. Now the difference is, I mean, I'll fall out of my chair if Texas makes 10 threes, like UCLA did. I'll be surprised if they attempted 10 threes, let alone made.
Yeah.
Does Texas have to make some threes, though?
I feel
Like they have to, right?
I think they have to. I think for Texas to win these big games against, we saw them lose against Notre Dame, but like against your South Carolinas, your Notre Dames, your really top caliber teams, you've got to find a way to get a couple threes to go.
Yeah, South Carolina has a rare disadvantage on the interior, but Pow Johnson, full Wiley, goes without saying they have to show up. If they don't, forget it, but I expect they will. Assuming that happens, I think I need to see a big game from Chloe Kitts. You heard Lulu say she's been inconsistent, 2 points against UCLA. Release Joyce Edwards. Hasn't needed to be anything other than a freshman coming off the bench, learning her way. I think this is her chance on a national stage to shine. And then I think South Carolina, they've gotten to the line a lot recently. That's not really their MO, but if they can get to the line against a Texas team that doesn't foul and get the Longhorns in foul trouble, I'll lean South Carolina. Texas, we just mentioned it. Shea Holly or Jordan Lee need to have a big game.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they pound the offensive glass, get turnovers, they just take so many more shots per game than the other team. If it's like a half court game and the field goal attempts are even, I like the Gamecocks. If Texas can win offensive rebounds, can force some turnovers against a team that protects the ball, I like the Longhorns. Who you got?
I think I'm going to go South Carolina here. As much as I think Texas can match up with them well in the front court and even have an advantage in the front court, I still think South Carolina wins this.
65-game home win streak. That's not a, that's a pretty safe bet. I have no real reason for it. I'll take Texas. I don't feel great. Don't feel great about it. But I will begrudgingly take Texas, and then I'm sure I'll be proven wrong. Other games from Sunday, Ohio State, Oregon, maybe a trap game for Ohio State. Comeback win against a rival, back home against pretty good, not an eye-opening Oregon team. What do you make of the Ducks? They're 12-4. Their net is somewhere in the mid-30s. So they're just kind of living there, right? Just like middle of the pack Big Ten.
Yeah, I think we'll learn a lot about them in conference play. I think a lot of these teams that have had maybe not the most exciting non-conference play, it's still a little hard to say like really where this team is, even though we're in January. But I think in the next couple of weeks, we learn quite a bit about a lot of these teams. They feel like they fit in that middle of the pack, but we'll see.
2 gettable Q1 opportunities for Washington in the next couple of days. At Michigan State Sunday, at Michigan State next Wednesday. RPIs in the mid-40s, work to do, but they're 12-4. If they split those 2 games, they only play Ohio State, Maryland, USC once, and they get 2 of them at home. I like the Huskies as a sneaky team that no one's talking about to be in that field. Does Clemson have any shot to be made for an upset against Notre Dame? Tigers have played well.
And I don't know. I think Notre Dame's in its own little tier here in the ACC, and I don't see it.
That's fine. I'll shut out the Tigers, though. This is a program that has 2 winning seasons in 20 years.
No,
they've only been above 500 in the ACC once in 25 years. They're on their 5th head coach since then. Sean Poppy's doing nice things in year 1.
Yeah, no, I've been impressed with Clemson in general. I just don't think they're at a place where they're going to compete with Notre Dame yet, which isn't a knock to them because there's not a lot of teams that are going to compete with Notre Dame. But they have looked better for sure. And nice win over Stanford earlier in the week. So
yeah, hung with NC State, beat Cal and Stanford. I don't think they'll make the tournament, but there's reason to be excited there for the first time in a while. Tuesday, Baylor, Utah. I think the Lady Bears still have something here. They're well-rounded. We know they can rebound. They're pretty good defensively. I don't know what's missing here, but something's missing there. But I want there to I want to think something's not missing. Like, I'm ready to say they could be a sneaky pick to be a second weekend type of team.
Yeah, I was high on Baylor coming into the season, and then they just did not live up to any of that hype to start it. But like, there's still a lot of talent on the team. They have a lot of size, a lot of length. We saw a version of basically the same team that like really gave USC a hard time in the tournament last year. So it's in there somewhere.
Yeah, they host UCLA in 10 days, and they are at TCU in the next game 6 days later. So we'll learn whether we should be believers or not. They're 14-4, assuming they beat Arizona State tomorrow. They'd be 14-4. I think like there's something there. And then Thursday we talked a little Notre Dame, Georgia Tech. If Danny Carnegie doesn't go. I don't see it for Georgia Tech.
Yeah, I think if it's a full strength Georgia Tech team, we've got a game, but I agree. You gotta have a full strength team.
Alabama, South Carolina looks less fun to talk about after last night. I just want Alabama. I want them to compete for 40 minutes. I don't care. They're probably going to lose. Right. Be within, 8 points in the fourth quarter. Make South Carolina sweat a little. And then Iowa, Nebraska, again, I was starting to lose a little bit. Nice win for Nebraska. I counted them out when Natalie Potts went down. Nice win over Michigan State on Wednesday. This was also the game where last year I said, here's your analysis. Iowa will beat Nebraska. And, well, here we are. I'm not making that mistake twice. If you're looking for a high-scoring game, it's probably close for all 40 minutes. There's your game next Thursday. That isn't Notre Dame, Georgia Tech. Megan, we both got to run. I have snow coming, so I have early pickup at daycare. You have a real person job, so you have to go. Enjoy your weekend, and we will talk again next Friday.
Sounds good.